we've got this neat little bridge season going on right now. You know, the Easter season is done, and ordinary time will be not by soon enough. Ordinary time, which you'll notice right away with all the green vestments and whatnot, will pretty much go all the way into November. But right now, we have this three little bridge weekend. Last week we had Pentecost. You know, the celebration of the Holy Spirit, Father and Son sending the Spirit to be with us. And many people like to think of it as like the beginning or the birth of the church in a more formal sense. This weekend when we celebrate Holy Trinity, which of course makes sense right after celebrating the Holy Spirit, we celebrate Father, Son, and Spirit together. And let's say, rather than get into a long treatise about let's say, three persons, one body, and all those wonderful things that Augustine and Thomas Aquinas wrote in books like this to describe, we'll just note, let's say that we celebrate their interweaving and their mutual love for each other and their love for us on a weekend like this. Next weekend we celebrate the Feast of the Body and Blood of Christ. So these 3 weekends will lead us into the long season of ordinary time. And, well, what better place to think about, say, the beginning of ordinary time is that we see Moses going on Mount Sinai to meet with God. And Moses talks about how God is. God is merciful and generous. God is slow to anger and rich in kindness and fidelity. Now, Moses, it's interesting, Moses does something you might think is a little cheeky. Moses invites God to journey with the Israelites. You might be thinking, hey, Moses, didn't God kind of free them from bondage in Egypt? You'd think he's been journeying with them already. But Moses has this moment now where the people have kind of, they're living sinfully. They've created, let's say, a golden calf as an idol instead of worshiping God. So Moses is pretty honest. He goes to God and talks about the sinfulness of his people and how stiff-necked they are. I mean, that is, how stubborn they are. You're thinking stubborn? No, not God's chosen people. And heavens, no, not us. But that's kind of how that is. Yet Moses asked God to receive the people, and God does. Moses has opened himself to a relationship with God in the hope that God will receive the people as God's own, with all their imperfections. Moses trusts in God, and Moses particularly trusts in the presence of God. This openness to a relationship with God requires us to look at who we are, who we trust, who we believe, and how we follow the triune, the three-part God. Relationships take work. I know that's not news to you. I'm talking to people who live in the midst of marriage and family, friendships and partnerships and understandings. We have experience when it comes to relationship, which is good because Paul writes about this a little bit in the second letter to the Corinthians today. Brothers and sisters, rejoice. Mend your ways. Encourage one another. Agree with one another. Live in peace, and the God of love and peace will be with you. What God is that? Well, the God who is merciful and generous, slow to anger, who is rich in kindness and fidelity. That is a familiar ring, doesn't it? Paul notes that our call to be in relationship with God requires that we be in relationship with one another, that we mend our daily lives with peacefulness as our goal. And you might think that's a tall order on a Sunday morning, and in a way, really it is, because ours is a time where the world is in great unrest and conflict between people, between the nations. Individuals get caught up in this. Even world leaders seem to be leading us into violence. We think about the things we can pick up by just reading the newspaper or checking out the news on something like this. You know, there's gun violence, especially with young victims. There's domestic violence, there's substance abuse, there's suicide, just to name a few that are all too common. What does it mean to live in peace with one another when there is so much violence in our world? Well, as a practical matter, do you find yourself holding back every now and then, maybe avoiding difficult conversations with family or friends, because you're not quite sure how things are going to turn out? It's as if we live walking on eggshells. I mean, do you find yourself holding back in your role as a citizen when it comes to looking at peace with family, with community, or among the nations of the world? This is not the fragile, eggshell walking kind of peace that God calls us to. True peace requires knowledge gained through listening, walking with each other, holding in the heart our neighbors, patiently, coming to understand each other. We see and we know fear and pain, and worry and isolations in others around us. We're open to conversations that let us see another view, how other people are living. And it gets us to think about our fears, our worries, and yes, our imperfections as well. As you and I mend our ways, do we develop ways to connect, honor, and be patient with others as we nurture together? As you heard Paul say, mend your ways, live in peace, and God and God and the God of peace and life will fill us with love. To be at peace with God, we need to be at peace with ourselves and with others. You heard in the gospel today that Jesus did not come into the world to condemn the world, but that so all might be saved through him. Jesus shows the way to salvation with God is one that is a life that is lived with peace and love. Today, every day, we are invited into a deeper relationship with Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit, Creator, Redeemer, Sanctifier. Their interweaving together forms like a bridge for us, that we can find ourselves living in this life knowing that we live, we move to death, and we move to new life. What can we do to be people who bring the words and ways of Christ with the urging of the Holy Spirit to our world that is so in need of healing and peace and love?